In 1923, Adolf Hitler was a nobody. He had no army, no political party of significance, no money, no formal education. He had failed twice to get into art school. He had spent years living in homeless shelters in Vienna. He had fought in a war that Germany lost and returned to a country that was falling apart. By 1933, 10 years later, he was the absolute ruler of Germany. 60 million people would die before it was over. The question historians have been asking ever since is not simply what Hitler did. It's how. How did a failed artist from a small Austrian town convince one of the most educated, culturally sophisticated nations in Europe to follow him into history's darkest chapter? The answer is not that the German people were uniquely evil. The answer is far more disturbing than that. The answer is that Adolf Hitler understood human psychology, fear, shame, belonging, and the need for a simple explanation in a complicated world, better than almost anyone who came before him. And he used that understanding to build something the world had never seen. This is the story of how it happened. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889 in Braunau am Inn, a small town on the border between Austria and Bavaria. His childhood was not the childhood of a monster. It was the childhood of an ordinary, difficult young man who would have been entirely forgotten by history had circumstances been different. His father, Alois Hitler, was a customs official, a rigid, authoritarian man who had little patience for his son's artistic ambitions. His mother, Clara, was devoted to Adolf in a way that bordered on obsessive. When she died of breast cancer in 1907, Hitler was 18 years old, and her death devastated him in a way he never fully recovered from. His doctor, Eduard Bloch, a Jewish physician who treated Clara in her final months, later recalled that he had never seen anyone so consumed by grief. Hitler applied to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna twice, in 1907 and 1908. He was rejected both times. The rejection committee noted that his architectural drawings showed promise, but his figure drawing was weak. Hitler was not prepared to hear this. He had believed completely and without question that he was destined for greatness as an artist. The rejection shattered that belief. What followed were years of drift. He lived in Vienna, first in a modest room, then progressively worse accommodations, eventually in a men's homeless shelter. He sold postcards of his architectural sketches on the street. He read voraciously, and he developed the political ideas that would eventually consume everything else. Vienna in the early 20th century was a hotbed of nationalist politics, racial ideology, and anti-Semitism. Hitler absorbed all of it. He was not inventing a new ideology. He was synthesizing ideas that were already in the air, giving them sharper edges and a more furious delivery. When the First World War began in 1914, Hitler enlisted immediately. He served as a messenger on the Western Front, was wounded twice, and was awarded the Iron Cross First Class. When Germany surrendered in November 1918, Hitler was in a military hospital, temporarily blinded by a mustard gas attack. The news of Germany's defeat, by his own account, broke him completely. A broken man with nothing left to lose. That is always the most dangerous kind. And what happened next? Nobody saw coming. To understand how Hitler rose to power, you have to understand what Germany felt like in 1919. The country had lost the war. 2 million German soldiers were dead. The economy was in ruins. And then came the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war, stripped of territory, its military reduced to a token force, and required to pay reparations so enormous that the final payment wasn't made until 2010. For the German people, Versailles was not just a political defeat, it was a humiliation, a wound to the national identity that festered for years. And into that wound Hitler poured a very specific poison. He offered an explanation, not the complicated, messy truth. Hitler offered a simple, clear, emotionally satisfying explanation. Germany had not lost the war. Germany had been stabbed in the back, by the Jews, by the communists, by the traitors within. He understood something fundamental about how human beings process shame. Shame is intolerable. When individuals or nations experience catastrophic failure, the psychological pressure to find an external explanation, someone to blame, is enormous. It is far easier to believe that you were betrayed than to accept that you were defeated. Hitler gave Germany someone to blame, and Germany, in its shame and its fury, was ready to listen. The Weimar Republic that followed the war was in many ways remarkable. One of the most progressive constitutions in the world, extraordinary art, film, and music, but it was also a country in continuous crisis. The hyperinflation of 1923 was so severe that workers were paid twice a day so they could spend their wages before they became worthless. The savings of the middle class, doctors, teachers, lawyers, shopkeepers, were wiped out overnight. Then came the Great Depression of 1929, which hit Germany harder than almost any other country. Unemployment reached 30%. Banks failed. Hunger was visible in the streets of major cities. Into this environment of repeated compounding crisis, Hitler offered not just a scapegoat but a complete alternative vision. A Germany restored to greatness. A Germany that would never be humiliated again. It is easy, from the comfort of historical distance, to ask why people didn't see through it. It is much harder to imagine yourself in 1932 Germany, unemployed, hungry, humiliated, and to feel the pull of a man who stood up and said, "I know what happened to you, I know who did it, and I will make it right." That pull was real, and it was engineered. But how exactly did he engineer it? The answer lies in something so simple and so dangerous that it changed the science of persuasion forever. The hyperinflation of 1923 is almost impossible to comprehend in human terms. By November of that year, $1 was worth 4 trillion German marks. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. People would order a coffee in a cafe, and by the time they finished it, the price had doubled. Workers would leave the factory at lunchtime to spend their morning wages before the afternoon's inflation made them worthless. But hyperinflation was not just an economic crisis, it was a psychological one. The people who suffered most were not the very poor. They had nothing to lose. The people who suffered most were the middle class, the families who had spent decades building savings, the pensioners who had worked their entire lives for financial security, the professionals who had trusted in the stability of institutions. In a matter of months, that trust was destroyed completely. And here is the critical point. When institutions fail, when the systems people have built their lives around suddenly prove worthless, the psychological response is not nuanced. It is not thoughtful. It is rage. It is the desperate search for something solid to hold on to. It is the hunger for a leader who seems to know exactly what happened and exactly what to do about it. Hitler was that leader. He did not create the crisis, but he understood how to feed on it with a precision that no other political figure of his era could match. Hitler was, by universal account of those who knew him, a mesmerizing public speaker. Not in the polished, articulate way of a trained orator, but in a raw, emotional, almost theatrical way that bypassed rational thought and went directly to feeling. He understood that political persuasion is not primarily an intellectual exercise, it is an emotional one. People do not follow leaders because they have been convinced by arguments. They follow leaders because they feel something: belonging, hope, righteous anger, pride. Hitler constructed his speeches like performances. He would begin slowly, quietly, almost hesitantly, drawing the audience in. He would build gradually, his voice rising, his gestures becoming more dramatic, until he reached a pitch of fury that seemed to release something in the crowd. Contemporary observers described audiences weeping, screaming, feeling as if they had experienced something religious. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, described watching Hitler speak for the first time as a conversion experience. The Nazi propaganda machine that Goebbels built was unprecedented in its sophistication. It controlled newspapers, radio, film, theater, music, and education. It did not simply suppress opposing views. It created a complete alternative reality in which the Nazi worldview was the only worldview available. The Nuremberg rallies were designed by architect Albert Speer specifically to produce an overwhelming aesthetic and emotional experience. Vast searchlights creating a cathedral of light, hundreds of thousands of people moving in perfect synchrony. This was not spontaneous enthusiasm, it was manufactured. But here is the crucial point. Manufactured or not, the experience felt real to the people inside it. The belonging felt real. The pride felt real. And once people have felt those things, it is extraordinarily difficult to take them away. Stop for a moment. Because what I'm about to tell you next is the part that most history books leave out, and it is the most important part of this entire story. What Goebbels built was not simply censorship. Any government can suppress opposition. What made the Nazi propaganda machine genuinely unprecedented was its ambition to replace reality entirely. Radio was the key instrument. By 1939, Germany had the highest rate of radio ownership in the world. The Nazi government had subsidized the production of cheap radio receivers, the Volksempfänger, or People's Receiver, specifically so that even the poorest German family could have one in their home. These radios were technically limited so they could not easily pick up foreign broadcasts. Every evening, millions of German families sat around their radios and listened to the same news, the same music, the same speeches. Not because they were forced to, but because it was there, it was free, and it told them what they wanted to hear. Film was the second instrument. Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, filmed at the 1934 Nuremberg rally, is still studied in film schools today as a masterpiece of visual propaganda. It made Hitler look not like a politician, but like a force of nature, a figure descended from myth and children. Perhaps most insidiously of all, the Nazi propaganda machine understood that the most durable loyalty is built in childhood. The Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls enrolled millions of young Germans in an organization that combined genuine adventure and belonging with total ideological indoctrination. Children who grew up in the Hitler Youth did not experience Nazism as propaganda. They experienced it as the natural order of the world. That is how you build a movement that sustains itself, not through fear alone, through genuine belief. The most disturbing question raised by the Holocaust is not about Hitler. It is about the millions of ordinary Germans and Austrians and Poles and French and others who participated in, facilitated, or simply allowed it to happen. Hannah Arendt, writing about the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the bureaucrat who organized the logistics of the Holocaust, coined the phrase, "the banality of evil." Eichmann was not a sadist. He was not a fanatic. He was a mid-level bureaucrat who was very good at his job, and whose job happened to involve the murder of millions of people. He followed orders. He did his paperwork. He met his quotas. The psychologist Stanley Milgram, in the early 1960s, found that ordinary people would administer what they believed to be severe electric shocks to another person, simply because a figure of authority instructed them to do so. The majority complied. The Holocaust was not the product of a uniquely evil people. It was the product of ordinary human psychology. The desire to belong, the deference to authority, the capacity to normalize the gradual escalation of cruelty, operating within a system specifically designed to maximize those tendencies. Hitler understood this. He did not ask Germany to become evil all at once. He moved gradually. He tested boundaries. He escalated slowly, normalizing each step before taking the next. The boycott of Jewish businesses in 1933. The Nuremberg laws stripping Jews of citizenship in 1935. Kristallnacht in 1938. The ghettos, the deportations, the camps. Each step made the next one seem less unthinkable. And by the time most people realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop it. But Hitler's story doesn't end with his victory. It ends in a bunker. The Milgram experiment revealed something that scientists and philosophers had suspected but had never been able to prove so cleanly: that ordinary people under ordinary conditions will do extraordinary harm if the right structures are in place. Those structures are an authority figure who takes responsibility, a gradual escalation that makes each step seem small, and a social environment in which compliance is normal and resistance is deviant. The Holocaust had all three. There is a moment in the historical record that captures this with terrible clarity. In 1941, in the Polish town of Józefów, a German reserve police battalion, ordinary middle-aged men, not SS fanatics, not hardened soldiers, was ordered to round up and shoot the Jewish population of the town. Their commander, before the operation began, told them that any man who did not feel he could participate could step aside. A handful did. The rest carried out the massacre. They were not monsters. They were not ideological fanatics. Many of them afterward expressed genuine discomfort with what they had done. But they did it anyway, because everyone around them was doing it, because an authority figure had ordered it, and because the machinery of the situation made refusal feel more difficult than compliance. The historian Christopher Browning, who documented this case in his book Ordinary Men, concluded that the lesson was not about Germans specifically. It was about human beings, about what any group of people, from any culture, any background, any era, is capable of when the right conditions are created around them. That is the most important thing to understand about Adolf Hitler. He did not corrupt a uniquely evil people. He revealed what ordinary people are capable of, and that revelation has never stopped being relevant. By 1945, the machinery of death that Hitler had built had killed 6 million Jews alongside millions of others: Roma, disabled people, political prisoners, Soviet civilians, homosexuals. Hitler spent his final days in a bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, as Soviet forces closed in from the east and American and British forces from the west. By all accounts, he was a wreck. He had aged catastrophically. His hands shook constantly. He raged at his generals. He issued orders to armies that no longer existed. On April 29, 1945, he married his longtime companion Eva Braun in the bunker. On April 30, 1945, he shot himself. Eva Braun took cyanide. Their bodies were burned in the Reich Chancellery Garden as Hitler had instructed. He was 56 years old. The Third Reich, he had promised would last 1,000 years, had lasted 12. Adolf Hitler did not rise to power because the German people were uniquely evil. He rose to power because he understood human weakness, the need for belonging, for simple answers, for someone to blame, and he exploited it with extraordinary skill. The lesson of Hitler is not about Germany in 1933. It is about what human beings are capable of under the right, or wrong, conditions. About how quickly the unthinkable can become the normal. About how manufactured emotion can substitute for thought. About how easily ordinary people can be made to participate in extraordinary evil. The structures he exploited, shame, fear, tribalism, the hunger for a simple story in a complicated world, are not historical artifacts. They are features of human psychology that exist in every culture and every era. Understanding how it happened is not academic, it is essential. Sources are linked below. We'll see you in the shadows.